I'm Pat Doris. Welcome to The Story. You know, it's been another interesting weather day. Crazy. I don't know if you saw it where you were, but here in downtown Portland, it rained so hard I thought I was in Hawaii for a moment. Just sheets of rain. Anyway, we've been thinking a lot about the weather recently, especially the way the power company, Portland General Electric, responded as more than 500,000 customers lost power during the recent snow and ice storm. And that is our big story tonight. All right, Portland General Electric customers, this one's for you. The utility is still assessing the damage from the storm last week, and we know that you have lots of questions about what the company did and what seemed to go wrong with its systems. But so does a group called the Citizens Utility Board. We'll hear from their executive director in a moment. First, let's agree that this was a super powerful storm. Lots of rain and then snow and then freezing rain and ice that just didn't seem to want to go away. Some folks were without power for a full week, a few even longer than that. PGE, the Portland area's largest power utility, released data Monday showing what happened over that week. At the height of the storm, 165,000 customers were without power. A customer is just 1 meter, so there's a lot more people than that impacted. Throughout the 9 days, a total of customer outages hit 524,600. PGE had 1,800 people, including crews and support staff, working on fixing all that. PGE says it fixed 23 big transmission lines and 69 smaller distribution lines and 14 substations. 599 transformers blew. I heard some in my neighborhood. 348 power poles and 1,333 crossarms were fixed as well. Okay, so the storm hit PGE customers hard, and the utility had a ton of work to do getting everyone back up and running. Now, I've asked for a sit-down interview with Maria Pope. She's PGE's CEO. I want to talk about what went right and what went wrong. Her people have politely declined for now and said, maybe later, so we'll see. Which leads to the question, is there any other way to get tough questions answered by PGE? Well, it turns out, yes, there is. And it will likely come from a man named Bob Jenks. He's the executive director of that group you may never have heard of, the Oregon Citizens Utility Board.
We've been around since 1984. We were set up by an initiative by Oregon voters who wanted a voice representing them at the Public Utility Commission, at the legislature. So we've been around for quite a few years. This is going to be our 30th anniversary. During that time, we've literally saved customers somewhere in the neighborhood of $9 billion by fighting unnecessary rate increases, stopping utilities from making bad investments, a whole series of things like that. So that's really how we do the work. We've got a staff of 10 people, so we're still a relatively small organization. We're a bit larger than we were in, say, the 90s, but we're not huge, and there's 6 utilities in Oregon that are regulated.
So you do have an advocate in this group. They're funded by a mix of individual contributions, grants, paid sponsorships of energy conferences that they hold and other events as well. And sometimes they get money from the Public Utilities Commission, or the PUC, to work on behalf of customers during PUC proceedings. Now, the Public Utilities Commission is the big group that approves rate hikes for companies like PGE. They're super important. The Citizens Utility Board does not do that, but they are experts in this field and they can influence the regulators who do decide it. Okay, very interesting, you say, and so what? Well, how are they going to ask tough questions of PGE? It's because PGE is expected to gather up all the expenses that they paid out during this storm and then ask the PUC for yet another rate hike so that you customers can basically pay PGE back for all the work they did. And the Citizens Utility Board can fight that and demand information from the company.
And we can look at what happened. Ultimately, PGE is going to ask for a bunch of money from customers to help cover the costs of the storm restoration. If the storm restoration was harder and more expensive and difficult to manage because these systems didn't really communicate well, the company didn't fully understand what was happening out in the field, then we can ask that the company not get full recovery for it. We can also in the process find out if there's fixes that the company needs to do in order to make the system work well. We can talk about sort of the systems that they have to have out of state and out of the area utility crews come in. Is that big enough? Is the size of the base utility crews big enough? So there's a series of issues that can be explored in this, but ultimately you can hold the utility accountable by not giving them full cost recovery for repairing and replacing the poles and wires and things that went down if they didn't have good systems in place in the first place going in and weren't prepared for this kind of storm.
Jenks said his group has heard lots of complaints from customers about PGE, the time it took to get power restored, lack of communication from PGE, outages disappearing from the outage map, making it seem like the power was back on when in fact it was not. Which makes him want to ask about those automated electric meters that nearly every house and apartment have now.
Us because our understanding from the PGE's automated meter system is that PGE, every meter pings back to the company every 15 minutes. And if you don't have power in your house, the company should know that. And the company shouldn't be thinking a house has power restored if it doesn't, because it shouldn't be getting that. It's not getting that signal. So some of the problems we're hearing about don't quite fit with our understanding of the system. So it does raise questions, and we do think there's a need to follow up and understand how their manual outage reporting and their systematic outage reporting work, and just why it took so long, and whether these communication channels can be improved in a way to really improve customers' experience. But there was a lot of frustration out there in PG customers.
And the difference between manual and system reporting is, I gather, manual, somebody's picking up the phone and calling in. A system is there must be an automatic way that it's notified.
Yes, exactly. Somebody, the old traditional way is to know about an outage, somebody's got to call in and report it. But when they went into automated meters, all meters read every 15 minutes. So every 15 minutes, my meter is telling PGE how much power I used in the last 15 minutes. But my meter is also telling the company in the process that it's alive, that it's working. And if they're not getting that report, that should mean that meter's out. So how their mapping was suggesting that meters were working when they weren't, to me doesn't make sense. And maybe that's not what happened, but that's again what we've been hearing from customers. And so those are things that I think are worth exploring and finding out what happened.
And we'll let you know how that goes. So what are your thoughts about all this? Did you lose power? Do you think PGE did a pretty good job considering the conditions, or maybe not so much? Let us know, will you? You can email us. The address is thestory@kgw.com, or call and leave a voicemail. The number is 503-226-5090. And you can bet we will be following the story in the weeks to come as PGE begins to submit reports on what went wrong and why, and if PGE customers will be on the hook to pay for it in the months to come, which would be on top of the big increase that already took effect this month. Meanwhile, the city of Portland and Multnomah County are at odds again, each of them pointing the finger at the other one for the way the warming shelters were run during the storm and how they were closed while there was still ice on the ground, kicking around 1,200 people out of the shelter for several nights where temperatures were frigid. This is a topic that fired a lot of you up last week. We were flooded with emails and voicemails from you. And Willamette Week has taken a deep dive into the way the emergency shelters are run in a series of articles, and we think their coverage is definitely worth your time. Willamette Week found out the city of Portland was only minimally involved in running the shelters during this past storm. That's because the city and the county had already signed an agreement in early January, according to Willamette Week. The agreement stipulated that the city would only provide workers and open up city buildings if the county supplied and paid for security guards at those sites. The agreement also says that the county had to provide sustainable flooring protection and that they have to exhaust every other option before requesting that city buildings are opened as shelters. The city also will no longer provide transportation to shelters. The county says the agreement impacted the way they responded to this storm. They say the city's refusal to help out meant that fewer community centers were opened as shelters. The city did provide one community shelter. But the county had trouble finding volunteers to work around the clock, and county workers were busy dealing with transportation and behavioral health issues with people who were in the shelters. A county spokesperson wrote to the mayor, "The city's involvement and the resulting consequences matched what they asked for." It's been pretty obvious to us and to you that the system to run these emergency shelters is a mess. And it turns out the two sides hired an outside consultant to study that very problem last year. You know what the analysis found out? Yeah, some big problems there. Willamette Week wrote that the researchers found the county and the city's emergency weather shelter response to be disjointed, inefficient, and a communications black hole. They found departments and bureaus had overlapping objectives and a constant battle over information, and the consultant urged that volunteers should be ready to go when the shelters need to open. Finally, how well are government leaders being transparent about their reasoning to open and close emergency shelters? Not very. The consultants wrote that a small group of government higher-ups made decisions in a silo about weather shelters and that there was not much clarity around what data informed these decisions. You can check out Willamette Week's article right now on their website. Their website is wweek.com. Now let's check in on some of your thoughts on the big political news yesterday as Democrats unveiled their proposal to adjust Measure 110 during the upcoming short legislative session in Salem. The headline among their package of ideas is to recriminalize possession of drugs like meth and fentanyl. Under the proposal, possession would become a Class C misdemeanor, which is the least severe of the misdemeanors, by the way, but it still carries up to 30 days in jail and a potential fine of over $1,200. It's the same class of crime as petty theft. But before someone could be charged with that crime, police would need to offer a deflection program, which is basically behavioral health and drug treatment. But if the person says thanks, no thanks, then the Class C misdemeanor can move forward. Democrats say recriminalizing possession would also help police get drugs off the streets because they would then have the authority to confiscate things like meth and fentanyl. That authority is murky at best when how 110 is currently written and practiced right now. Republicans have blasted the proposal, though, mostly focusing on how weak Class C misdemeanors are. Many of you have agreed. Joe wrote to us to say, "The Measure 110 proposal does not go far enough. I'm a Democrat, but cannot get behind the mild Class C misdemeanor crap. Make use of drugs in public illegal with stiff enough penalties to deter people from doing it and to deter other homeless druggies from coming to the state because of lax laws."
All they're doing is putting a Band-Aid on a gaping, bleeding gusher. They're not going for the actual problem, which in my opinion is homelessness. Until they deal with that, they're not really going to do anything but keep patching people up. I know a lot of people think drug addiction leads to homelessness. I'm much more in the camp that it's the other way around. You've got your life, you've got your job, you've got your home, and everything's going great, and you lose your job or whatever. Situations put you out on the street, and that's where you can succumb to drugs and get addicted.
All right, thanks for your comments, Margie. Some of you agree with a viewer named Ed who's had enough of 110 altogether. "I voted for 110," he writes, "when I was younger and naive. Today's wreck of a city illustrates what a mistake that was. I'm for repeal." It seems a safe bet that Democrats won't even consider a full repeal during this session, but last night we did remind you of an effort by Max Williams. He's the former head of Oregon's prison system and a 3-term lawmaker. He's spearheading the threat to start an initiative petition to ask voters to throw out Measure 110 this fall if the legislature does not go far enough with reforms. He says a Class C misdemeanor, far too lenient. So his efforts to let voters have a say seems plausible, at least at this point. And that led to this voicemail.
How do we get a hold of and support Max Williams in his effort to recall ballot Measure 110? That's important to me. Please share it with us.
You betcha. So for those of you who are interested in learning more about the potential ballot initiative, Williams Group has a website where you can get involved. The name is pretty easy to remember, fixballotmeasure110.com. But despite all the noise from Republicans and others against this proposal, some of you think that 110 has not really gotten a fair shot due to a lack of available treatment. Darcy wrote in to say, "How about we dedicate some resources to get people timely treatment to reduce drug use? Just jailing folks to make them detox the hard way is not treatment. Follow the whole measure and make resources available, then evaluate its success or failure. It has only been implemented halfway, and that's not working." Collette points to the public defender shortage as well, writing in to say, yes, public drug use on our streets needs to be illegal, just like alcohol consumption. However, criminalizing drug use without first providing adequate treatment centers for addiction will not solve the problem, but will cause an already taxed indigent attorney shortage to increase and possibly break while penalizing the addict without allowing a viable alternative. Measure 110 reform is perhaps the biggest issue that we're going to be following during Oregon's upcoming legislative session, which gets underway in Salem in just a week and a half. That's on February 5th. Coming up next now on The Story. Today, the Secretary of State's office released an audit of the Oregon Medical Board, which is in charge of disciplining doctors accused of wrongdoing. The audit comes not long after the medical board was heavily featured in our Sick Medicine documentary. In fact, they even sued us to stop us from getting public records. Investigative reporter Evan Watson digs into the audit's findings as well as what's happening with our very own court case when The Story returns. A new audit says the Oregon Medical Board is not consistent in how it disciplines medical providers. The audit from the Secretary of State's office comes months after KGW published our investigative documentary, Sick Medicine. That documentary uncovered what happens when state medical boards fail to stop doctors accused of serious wrongdoing from practicing medicine elsewhere. Investigative reporter Evan Watson breaks down the audit's findings.
When patients file a complaint about their doctor, it's the Oregon Medical Board that investigates. The board receives about 750 written complaints each year, and disciplinary actions are often made quietly, shielded from the public. So how do we know if the medical board's decisions are fair? An Oregon Secretary of State audit found the medical board has been inconsistent in its punishments.
We had found that sometimes when they're making decisions, they are looking for similar cases by a memory, like the medical board managers or staff would remember similar cases and then propose those for the boards to look into to inform their decisions. But there was no systematic process and structure in place.
Auditors said the medical board's process of comparing disciplinary decisions is informal and intermittent, leading to actions that aren't equitable, even with the varying differences of each medical case.
When we looked at other states, we found that a lot of them had more formal policies in place to make sure that when you have cases that are similar, they're coming out with similar disciplinary decisions on those.
This audit comes on the heels of KGW's investigative documentary, Sick Medicine. It exposed how medical boards around the country allow doctors to keep practicing despite being accused of serious violations, ranging from sexual abuse to gross negligence, leading to the death of a patient. For example, our investigation found a doctor accused of sexual battery by multiple patients in Oregon who was subsequently allowed to practice medicine in Arizona. In that case, the Oregon Medical Board sued KGW to prevent us from obtaining medical board records about the alleged misconduct. KGW found that 28 of the doctors disciplined by the Oregon Medical Board between 2012 and 2022 went on to practice medicine in another state. In this new report, auditors found that the medical board lacks a process to analyze and compare case outcomes, needing an improved database to make better informed and balanced decisions in the future.
And right now, the board cannot readily assure the public that their decision-making is equitable and consistent because their current systems and policies and procedures or lack thereof does not allow them to do that.
The Oregon Medical Board responded to the audit, agreeing with all 4 of the auditor's recommendations. The board's executive director saying the board will expand discipline guidelines beyond DUI and opioid prescribing cases to all areas. The medical board says it will have a new database by 2025, allowing it to categorize complaints by type. It also plans to start regular systematic reviews to look for inconsistent outcomes.
So it gives the public and licensees a little bit of assurance that, yeah, there is a defined process that they're following. It's not kind of a black box that the case goes through whatever happens, and then it comes out with a decision. It gives a more defined process for that.
Evan's with me now. I know that the medical board sued KGW to try and keep us from getting those records. Where do things stand now?
Well, in December, a judge ruled that KGW should get at least some of the records into a doctor accused of sexual misconduct, but our attorneys are still working out the terms of that arrangement. So stay tuned. We're going to have more from the medical board when we get that, Pat.
All right, thanks, Evan. And a reminder, you can watch our full documentary, Sick Medicine, right now on the KGW YouTube page or our streaming channel called KGW Plus, which can be found on Roku, Amazon Fire, and Apple TV. Portland City leaders gathered the press today to ask residents to renew a 10-cent per gallon gas tax when we vote this May. The 10-cent tax funds the Fixing Our Streets program. It was passed first back in 2016 and then renewed in 2020. With last year's spike in the number of traffic deaths, leaders say now is not the time to stop funding the program. John Adams has the story.
City leaders made a plea to Portland residents today. Renew a 10-cent gas tax in May or see some PBOT programs cut.
If the 10 cents gas tax is not renewed, our challenges will be greater than ever, and Portlanders will see a significant decline in the services that PBOT is able to offer.
If passed, the tax is projected to generate $70 million over the next 4 years. PBOT says the tax will provide funding for road paving, street lighting, fixing potholes, and upgrading bike lanes. It will also provide significant funding to improve roads and intersections in high-crash corridors, including on 122nd Avenue, which saw 6 traffic fatalities in 2023.
These are preventable deaths, and they disproportionately affect people walking, people without housing, and people in East Portland. This is no time to be slashing PBOT budgets or critical staff who are working to address emergency conditions and a public health epidemic of traffic violence.
The tax saw widespread support on the ballot in 2020, with 77% of residents voting in favor. But since then, we've seen inflationary pressures from the COVID-19 pandemic. PBOT Director Millicent Williams acknowledged that despite an increase in costs, their study showed residents did not want to see the tax increased.
There was not the appetite for us to increase, even according to inflation. So we're looking at how we can make sure we stretch the dollar as far as we can by leveraging Fixing Our Streets dollars against other investments.
John Adams, KGW News.
Thanks, John. Now, you may remember that one of the recommendations from the Governor Kotek's downtown task force was no new taxes for at least 3 years. And last spring, Mayor Ted Wheeler said he wanted to freeze in new taxes as well. But today, Wheeler said he does support this gas tax renewal because, well, it does not increase taxes. It just renews one that people are already paying for. Something to think about. That's the end of our show. Thanks so much for watching. And remember, the story, our collective story, that never ends. The good stuff's coming your way next, and I'll see you right back here tomorrow night at 6:30.